All right, basics of political geography. Here we go. Bunch of definitions here to start the unit. We got state, sovereignty, nation, nation states, ethnicity, and race. To start, let's start with a state. How many countries are there in the world? Really hard to come up with a number because part of the definition of a state is hard. Recognized by other states. This is really hard. If you see state and country, they are synonyms. Minnesota is a sub-state. In political geography terms, it is a level below a state/country. There is an official definitional difference between state and country, and to be honest, I've put it out of my mind because in all practical purposes, they are the same. So let's first look at this. What is a state is really hard. So some of them are easy to tell what is a state. China is a state. Does it have defined boundaries? Yes. Permanent population? Yes. Sovereignty over domestic and international affairs? Yes. Is it recognized by other states? Yes. China's in. Is Taiwan permanent population? Yes. Defined boundaries? Yes. Control over its internal and international affairs? Kind of. Recognized by other states? No. Why? Because China won't let it. China won't let it. It's a remnant of the Chinese Civil War from 1949. Is Hong Kong Macau? No. Why? Permanent population? Yes. Defined borders? Yes. Control over its domestic affairs? Kind of. They're under a system called one city, two systems. Macau is the same. Again, remnants of colonialism, with Macau being remnants of Portugal and Hong Kong being remnants of the British. And so there you can get a little trouble because Taiwan basically functions as an independent country. Hong Kong and Macau really don't because of that one system, two cities setup. But then you run into places like South Korea and North Korea. Permanent populations, yes. Defined borders, yes. Independent control over foreign and domestic affairs, yes. Recognized by other states, yes. So, yeah, they are separate countries. However, because the truce to end the Korean War was never signed, or there's no peace treaty ever, they're actually technically still one country. They completely function as two. And so if you're asking me how many countries are in the Korean Peninsula, I'm going to tell you two. However, 2018 Olympics, they played as one country. Now, how about Greenland? Greenland, permanent population, yes. Defined borders, yes. Control over domestic affairs, yes. International affairs, no. And this is still you're on the problem. Nobody recognizes it as an independent country. It's owned by Denmark. How about the bottom two? How about this one here? Western Sahara. Morocco says, hey, you're ours. Western Sahara says, no, you're not. Morocco built walls all around it. You can see the walls here. Ooh. Most people do recognize the country. Morocco was actually kicked out of the African Union for a time because they didn't recognize Western Sahara as a country. So those are all like obvious ones. Well, not obvious ones, but like legit debates. But then you have some people like Sealand and Zakistan as two examples, where Sealand, they literally in 1967, they put a flag up, said, hey, we're our own country. We're not going to pay taxes to Britain anymore. It's an oil rig 7 miles off the coast. It's an oil platform 7 miles off the coast of England. Not a country by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a court ruling in 1967 that kind of gave them independent status. So we don't really know where they are at this point. Well, yes, no one recognizes them as a country, but they would say they're their own country. Some other debatable ones here. In Georgia, just south of Russia, here's the Black Sea, Turkey, Armenia, etc. South Ossetia is one that says they're their own land. One that no one recognizes them except Russia, and that's just to make the people in Georgia not happy. Really, kind of the one that most functions as a country in the world today, besides Taiwan, that people actually still recognize is Kosovo. Serbia sees it as a breakaway state, remnants of Yugoslavia. They are a different ethnicity. But basically, anybody associated with the Serbs, Russia being the biggest one, does not recognize Kosovo as a country. I want to talk about here a different concept we haven't talked about yet is Somaliland. Somaliland basically functions as an autonomous region, which I'll put the definition up now. There we go, autonomous region, a defined area that has a high degree of self-government. It basically functions as an independent country through and through. Now, there's a state and there's sovereignty. How about a nation? A nation is a group of people. So that's the key part here. A group of people, and you can read the four things here. Nation and ethnicity, if you notice, have the first two things the same. The bottom two, ethnicity doesn't have. So this is where you're going to look at a place like in Spain, where you got Catalonians, you got the Basques and the Gaelics, who would love to have their independent rule. They're both ethnicities and their nationalities. Why? They would love to be independent countries. Especially Catalonia is getting closer and closer. Okay. In Europe as a whole, and so a nation state is when you see when you see a nation and a state having the same boundaries. Look at Portugal, look at Denmark, look at Greece, as all being examples of nation states, because the borders of the nation, the people, and the borders of the political entity of the state basically match up with each other. Here are characteristics of nation states. However, it needs to be said that there is no perfect nation state in the world today. Japan is about the closest you're going to get. National immigration has been incredibly low to Japan for years because, well, Japan has had an anti-immigrant policy for years. And so it's about as close as you're going to get, but there are other nationalities there. And so the United States is not considered multinational, is considered multi-ethnic, mainly because, yeah, they're, so take African Americans. African Americans, do they have things that unify African Americans? Yes. Do they have cultural values? Yes. Do they have a shared history? Yes. However, I have never heard African Americans claiming a space as their homeland or desiring their own state. If that would happen, yes, it would change from ethnicity to a nation. Now, just a part of the identity part here, nation, ethnicity is also race, a socially imposed definition by the dominant group. And so something to think about with that is Brazil. Race in Brazil, so A is the 2010 census, and then B is how people self-identify. You can see it's not easy to identify this, and this can get complicated at times. So, for instance, I mean, ethnicity and race is commonly screwed up in this country, but it's mainly, I mean, so like we use different terms around the country, such, I mean, African American is ethnicity and black would be race, for instance. All right, second part. Oh, by the way, oops, left out a nation. Our Native American indigenous tribe up here, and I always butcher the pronunciation of this, Nunavut. Nunavut is an area in Canada. It became a province about turn of the century or so, where they became, in a lot of ways, our next, there we go, an autonomous region. A defined area that has a high degree of self-government. And so this is really, you're not looking at places in the United States mainly. It's basically places that function as an independent country, but aren't an independent country. One of the best examples is also the largest stateless nation in the world, and that is the Kurds. The Kurds are here. The Kurds are not completely unified, but you can see here the Kurds are in Syria, they're in Turkey, they're in Armenia, they're in Iran, and they're in Iraq. And basically, when the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003, one of our allies was the Kurds. And the Kurds basically have functioned as an autonomous region. Now, Saddam Hussein would do some chemical weapons testing there, and it's part of the reason the United States decided to go take them out. But, I mean, they basically functioned as their own independent country, but still in Iraq's borders. Somaliland would be another one. Now, if the Kurds had their way, this would be everything that they would have. But, however, to think that the Kurds are 100% unified is also not accurate. Okay, you can see here that this is kind of what you see, that where the Kurds are, and they would love to be their own country. They almost, Iraq, or the people in Iraq voted to become an independent country and then basically went nowhere. Other stateless nations, you got the Uyghurs, you got Tibet as well. That they are 100, I mean, they're autonomous regions as well, but I mean, in reality, they are under control of the Chinese national government. Now, our next definition is a multi-state nation, when a nation is divided into multiple states. And this gets down to, again, that technicality of what is a state before. The Korean Peninsula is a multi-state nation. Okay. Multinational states, multiple nations living in the same country. The UK is the best example. You got the Scottish, you got the Welsh, you got Northern Ireland, and the Brits all living under one flag. Okay, next we have multi-ethnic, which we actually already talked about. But then how about some other examples of multi-ethnic? We have down here in Other examples of multi-ethnic states down here, you have Switzerland with just ethnicity or different or the Swiss Germans, the Swiss Italians, the Swiss French. No one's calling for independence, but they have such their own. They're not autonomous regions, but they've just kind of come together. Belgium. Belgium is also multi-ethnic. In some ways, it's multinational because in some ways these places want to become their own. So you got the Dutch, the Flemish, they're called, in Flanders in the north and the Wallonians in the south. I'd be just fine if you called this multinational. I mean, there's been talk of becoming their own countries from time, but not. It's really kind of a gray area, to be honest. The last definition on here was territoriality, and territoriality is the willingness by one person or group to defend the space they claim, who actually controls an area. The best example right now in the world of this is the South China Sea. So, China claims all of this. Now let's look at how close to the Philippines border that is. How close to, and some of it's in Vietnam's waters, Malaysia, Brunei, Malaysia actually, or I'm sorry, not Malaysia, Indonesia. It's a mess. China claims it as being their territory, as being their own. Well, guess what? So does all those other countries I just said, which are part of ASEAN, the South Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Why does China claim it? Well, because they want it to be theirs, and they're building islands, and they want the resources to be theirs. They've literally built islands in the South China Sea with landing strips for military planes. Who owns the territory? So you go to places around the world, and yeah, it looks clean and easy, right? Here you go. Here's a map of China. It's one big communist country with a lot of capitalist tendencies. But they aren't all one group, and they're not all unified because you have autonomous regions. Who actually controls this? Well, China does, but the Tibetans control a lot of it. And they have they don't have a ton of say of all their own, but they do have some. The Uyghurs the same way. I mean, the territoriality of who actually controls the location can be really hard. It can be really hard to map when people don't agree on borders. The South China Sea is the most obvious one in the world where people do not agree on borders and is in no way going to be solved anytime soon.